That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I'm very happy to be joined by Ilana Redstone. She's a professor at the University of Illinois and the author of The Certainty Trap. And Ilana, thank you so much for joining me on what will be the first release of 2025. So that's
I'm
huge.
Honored. Thank you.
That is huge. The stars aligned. And you're going to be the first one out the gate. And before we started recording, like just right before, Ilana was asking me about, is this my full-time gig? And I was explaining it's not my full-time gig. And for those of you who are following me, you probably follow me because of my, my comedy. You see my comedy videos, and the podcast is a way for me, as I described, to have adult conversations, or at least conversations with adults. This isn't dirty talk or anything like that. And Ilana asked me the, reasonable question. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean adult conversations? Like, do you run a daycare? So I'm the father of two. I have a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. So, much of my day is, either, kind of tending to my kids with my wife, or complaining about the noise that they're making, or getting into fights online, because that's where a lot of war takes place now, online arguments. So the podcast has been a splendid way for me to actually have civil conversations with interesting people, and I get to practice my conversating. My conversations, I guess.
So I'm just curious, what is the most interesting war you've gotten into online, or the most memorable?
There was one that's rather recently. And I was thinking about like writing about it, because I think it says, if it doesn't necessarily say anything about the times we're living in, but it says a lot about me in these times. So there was an ongoing Twitter X discussions on the case of Daniel Penny, who was recently
he's
found,
the New York subway guy.
Yeah. So he was found not guilty of the the death of Jordan Neely, or I forget what it was exactly. Jordan Neely died, but Daniel Penny was found not guilty. He won't be serving time for it. And I've been a very vocal supporter of Daniel Penny and his saga and what he's gone through. Him? No, I just
from the outside. Yeah.
The case resonated with me greatly, just as I was a lifelong New Yorker who had ridden the subway and ridden the subway a lot. And there was a time when I absolutely loved riding the subway. And then then at some point there was sort of this turn that happened where I no longer felt safe on the subway. And I was like, man, this is so weird that this transportation system that I used to love. I mean, any chance I got to ride the subway, I would. There was a monthly Metro pass that you could get for the subway, and there were months where I would actually like tick off every single day that I used it, and then like add up how much it would cost, and it was like I'm beating the system. Like I'm spending like $100+ but using maybe close to $400 worth of rides. So I just sort of I noticed the down, sort of NYC going down for a while, and my wife and I lived in Brooklyn Heights for some years, and then when she was going to have we were going to have kids in the city, I was just like, man, I just don't feel like I don't feel comfortable with them, the prospect of them riding the subway by themselves. I just didn't feel safe about. And in a big part because I know of just, even violence aside, just how uncomfortable it can be just having like, loud, aggressive, homeless people who knows what they're going to do that day. And for a while, just not feeling like even like a fellow New Yorker would be there to stick up for them. So the the case of Daniel Penny, stuck out and I guess, hit me more deeply than I thought it would for that reason. And then also finding out the person of, Jordan Neely who died, his history and the lengths that people would go to defend that person who I thought, overall was a, definitely a minus on the, when it came to life in New York City. So, from there, we're talking about a case where that involved violence and involved aggression. And I think my responses to it in written form were very much the aggressive, I wouldn't necessarily say violent, but were aggressive. So I got into many, many squabbles. And there was one squabble where a guy had said something like, I've somehow managed to ride the subway for all these years and never choked anyone to death. To which I just responded with a flip like, well, are you capable? And then that led to the guy basically saying like, yeah, let's meet up and fight.
Oh God. Okay.
And it's like, let's meet up and fight, which I thought, I was like, oh man, well, how stupid on so many levels. But then I actually DM'd the guy and I said, we could probably like do something cool here. Like maybe put together like a video about self-defense on the subway and the best way to incapacitate someone without strikes, where the safe way of incapacitating somebody and, for help or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of how the years that I've been working like in comedy and production, I sort of look at problems like, oh, is there a way to make something, interesting or cool out of this, whether it's a conversation or, a short video or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, this guy, he wasn't having it. He was like, no, let's just meet up and fight. And it stuck. And I told him, no, thanks. But it stuck with me. It stuck with me for, I would say for a few, at least a day or two, because I was thinking about like, oh, I had sort of let myself get sucked into this stupidity of, online discourse, going back and forth. And then also there was something about, kind of like the manhood pride where it's like, whoa, here's like an old school call out. Like, yeah, let's meet up and fight. And it was like, man, it was really bothering me. Like in a way, it was like, by me saying, no, I don't want to meet up and fight you. It's like, man, am I a pussy? And here I am, I'm a 42-year-old man having this stupid, debate with myself and whoever this guy is. And it like kept me up at night. I was like, damn, how am I going to handle, how am I going to handle this? Because a big part of it too, is I think me sort of like losing control of I don't know, the narrative, but my response, like, oh, there's a better way I could have responded to that. That didn't have to be this, And, and I had just like made an appearance on Gutfeld. It was my 6th time on Gutfeld, and I had sold a bunch of books. So it was like all this positivity. And then in the midst of this positivity was this utter stupidity.
Interesting.
And yeah, so I was like, man, what am I going to do with this? And it turns out we had both blocked each other, but the guy had his Twitter account was, let's say, like it wasn't like his public facing account, he wasn't exactly anonymous, but this guy had a life outside of whatever was happening on Twitter. Right?
Sure.
And I was able to track down this guy and that life that he has outside of Twitter. And it turns out this guy was a criminal defense attorney with a LinkedIn page. And if you go on his LinkedIn page, here's his resume, where he went to college, all the different law firms where he works. He's now in private practice, etc. There's a picture of him in a suit with a tie, looking very professional. If you look at his comments that he leaves, are very positive comments, like very, and it was like, oh, this is so funny. Where on this other platform, this is the guy calling me out to get into a fist fight, but on here it's very, very different. So I wrote him an email on his LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I basically said to him, because he had he wanted to meet up and fight. I said, hey man, the prospect of meeting up and fighting is very stupid on so many levels.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm just to let you know, I'm hosting a comedy festival, a 3-day comedy festival in New Jersey. So this is where I will be. If you'd like to come down, happy to get you tickets to the show, right? And I'd be happy to get you, tickets to the show, however you want. Bring your wife down, you know, and come in peace, et cetera. But if you have other plans, we'll just take it from there. And then I made a joke about, worst case scenario. At least we both know a criminal defense attorney, and and it was I was happy with that with that email. And the guy ended up getting back to me after the festival had run
Okay.
its course, and just basically saying, no worries. He ended up nuking all of his social media, and God bless. Very short, to the point. And I learned like a few things, from that. One of the things that I learned is the response that I gave him on that platform, the LinkedIn platform, is a response that I was more happy with, because I led with hey, this is silly. The prospect, the idea I'm going to meet up with you and fight you is so stupid. But here's an opportunity. If you wanted to come and, check out some comedy or talk or meet or whatever you want, here I am. I'm open there. And then also, part of it is, leaving open the opportunity. If you really wanted to come down and you really wanted to fight me, well, you have 3 days where you could do it, 3 different days, and I'm going to be doing comedy, et cetera. But it also showed me too, it's how much is at risk too for some people, because I'm very fortunate to be working in comedy, to be an author, because anything that happens to me, I get to use as material. All the moments when I'm at my worst, I could use that material. This conversation, the situation I just described to you.
Yeah.
That I could use that on a stand-up bit. I can write about it. I could do all this stuff. Hell, I could even take that guy's picture and say, hey, this is the conversation I had with this guy. And it turns out that not everybody is able to do that because of the work that they're doing in real life. Because here we have a criminal defense attorney with a LinkedIn profile challenging a guy to go and have a fight. And it's when you talk about who's risking more here, bro, you're risking a lot by by being whatever version of a tough guy you want to be online. And it was and then again, I was being a version of a tough guy too. And it's I am so done with stupid call outs and things like that, because it's not worth it. I have no interest in getting into a fight with anybody, and it's a waste of time and sometimes a waste of sleep. I was up thinking about this.
Wow.
I'm really not happy with how I respond to that. So I'm my apologies for taking up.
No, it's interesting.
This whole point. So
it's interesting.
Have you ever succumbed to that mass, not even mass stupidity, my style of stupidity?
I mean, probably in different ways. I don't really do much on social media. So that's not my particular vice. But, if the question is, have I ever come to sort of stupid decisions, rash, of course. And the other thing is, I would say, is that it's that quick, part of what struck me in what you were just describing was how much better you felt when you wrote him the message on LinkedIn, right? So that's, which is interesting, that you didn't, in other words, it's not at least from what you're saying, it's not like you felt kind of weaker or more like a pussy or whatever when you were sending the olive branch message on LinkedIn than when you said, maybe you're not capable or whatever on X/Twitter. And sometimes that's what in the work that I do, in stuff on the certainty trap, and because it's about sort of how we engage and how we think about it, engagement on really heated issues. Sometimes the response that I'll get is, it just feels better. Like it just feels better to not be pissed off all the time, which makes it sound kind of self-helpy, which is not my shtick at all. But I'm happy if that's the outcome. That doesn't really answer your question. Like on social media, that's not really my thing, but I've definitely been in situations where I have jumped to quick judgments and then after the fact, I mean, I can tell you give you one specific example. So I have a good friend. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to anonymize how I'm talking about this. I have a good friend who was having, she was in an argument. She's been married for a long time and has a very solid marriage. And she was going through a kind of a rough patch for a couple of weeks with her husband because it was mostly about parenting. They have 2 kids, and it was they were disagreeing about how to parent their 12 and 13-year-olds. And she was saying, and so there was just a fairly tense time for them in what's otherwise been a very strong and stable marriage. And so I was talking to her one time, and she was telling me how her husband, been talking to him about this and whatever, and it was sort of an ongoing conversation, and how he had said that basically while they were kind of on rocky ground, like he didn't really think that either of them should be traveling. And in particular, like that weekend coming up, he had a kind of a guys' weekend thing planned. And then the following weekend, just totally by chance, she had a work thing that she was supposed to go do. And she doesn't travel very often for work. And so when she's telling me this, and I'm hearing this all filtered through her, and she's telling me this, and I'm getting like pissed off. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, his guys' weekend is not the same as your work thing. Right. Like, I'm like, this is not the same as your work thing. I'm like, fuck that. This feels really manipulative. Like, and I'm like, and then like a couple of days later, like she comes back to me and, and they're all good. They're all fine. She comes back to me and she's like, we talked about it. She and her husband, she's like, we talked about it again. And she's like, he's really concerned about, that one of us would be more likely to stray, that adultery becomes more likely if someone's traveling while the marriage is rocky. And I was like, and so suddenly I had this moment. I was like, yeah, I totally get it. I was like, it doesn't matter if I agree with him or what I think the probability is of either of them straying from what doesn't even matter. Like, I get how he got there. Like it was not through, there was a way that he got to his position that had nothing to do with wanting to be manipulative or controlling or whatever other things that I had jumped to a rush judgment about, that kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, totally.
Yeah,
no, because when you were describing it, I was thinking the same thing, sort of that one-to-one comparison, like, guys weekend to work weekend. Right. Yeah. But yeah, and I don't, obviously I don't know your friends, but I wonder if the going astray thing had been a problem in the past, or if someone had.
No, it hadn't in their context. No, not at all. It was just, I think it was just, there was no history there. There was nothing like that. Mm-hmm. But I guess what struck me was my quick judgment of him, and then how, like, just with a little bit more information, it was, and my attribution of his motives, right? Like that it was just controlling, manipulation, whatever. And how I was like, wow, okay, no, there's another version of this story here that has nothing to do with him being, an ass.
Yeah. And there's something that I've learned just as a parent. So, your friends having kids that are that old. I have a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. The sort of cliche thing you hear a lot is like, if parents are getting divorced, they tell their kid, this is not because of you. Mm-hmm. But I could imagine saying, like, no, it is because of you. It's because of the both of you that we're getting divorced, because you kids have gotten in the way of a very happy relationship that your parents had. And there seems to be, at least in my, like, there seems to be, it's incredible the amount of tension that can be, sort of, I don't know, brought to a relationship when other people are involved, even if those other people are your kids, if they're not sleeping, if they're fighting all the time and all that. And I kind of, and I sort of, and I have the same experience with being online too much, where I was taking a lot of the online debates, fights, arguments that are, kind of a complete waste of time. And they were finding that energy was finding its way into my own relationship. where it's like, I'm snapping at
Interesting.
my wife as if she's some anonymous asshole on X
Yeah.
who
Well,
disagrees
so
with her.
as I can say, so I have three kids of my own who are all they're they're 12, 15, and 8 and 17 now, and I've been divorced. Um, and so I can,
Wow.
and there are lots of yeah. I mean, I get what you're describing, the added stress that kids can add for sure. And just speaking on behalf of the divorced people of the world, there are lots of other reasons, obviously, as well
Right.
that marriages
Preach.
end.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Is Redstone, is that your maiden name?
Yeah, it is. I went back
That's
to my maiden name after I got divorced.
It's a great name. I mean,
It's a good name, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I there wasn't a character in Chinatown named Redstone, was there?
Oh
It,
gosh, I don't know.
it's
That's a first.
it feels like a kind of a older Hollywood, kind of name for
Oh, interesting. It's an
yeah.
anglicized version of a very Jewish sounding last name that
Oh
was,
yeah?
so a couple of generations, go back probably 2 generations at least. Yeah, it was something like Rothstein.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Rothstein into Reds. Okay.
Yeah.
What was it? What was Kirk Douglas and Michael Douglas? I forget they had a
Oh, yeah.
very Russian name.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that story and I also cannot remember the original name.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we've hit the name where it comes from.
Yeah. No relation to Sumner Redstone at all.
Okay, I think that might have been what I saw.
Viacom. Yeah, no, 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 no,
Yeah,
no giant fortune behind that
yeah,
name, at least in my case.
right. So you're at the University of Illinois.
Yep.
You in the sociology, is that the
Yeah,
field?
I'm in the sociology department.
Yeah. So I don't have to tell you, but over the past however many years, I think sociology's gotten quite a bad rap. Um, what are your feelings on that? You obviously
I
can't
think
be
it's
happy.
mostly, I mean, I think it's mostly deserved. I mean, I think
Mhm.
it's mostly what the discipline has done to itself. I mean, I've been doing in the last several years, I've been doing mostly public facing work. Um, and so I have my first academic paper coming out probably in the next month or something. The first in quite a while. Like I used to do very traditional academic work, and I haven't had an academic publication, like a peer-reviewed academic publication, in a while because I've been focused on the public-facing work. But in that paper, I talk about one of the things I talk about is the discipline of sociology and kind of what it's become. But I think that I mean I think that sociology has I mean, where do I even start? Sociology is a discipline that is sort of born from a singular political perspective, right? So, like the idea of the discipline is basically, I mean, and I'm oversimplifying, but is to say, okay, look at inequality in the world, and it varies, however, whatever type of inequality along whatever dimension, and think about the structural causes of structural meaning like not individual choice in this classic conservative liberal division, right? Like, so what are the structural causes, the potential structural causes of this inequality? And so that's the basis of a lot of, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but to look for structural causes and to sort of see, in other words, the original idea being to kind of see broader patterns. If you see somebody who's unemployed, you're looking at the broader context in which they're unemployed, sort of the unemployment rate, factories closing, whatever else might be going on. But to the point where you've excluded any role of individual agency, right? All of that stuff. And that all becomes very much something that you're not supposed to talk about. So, sociology has taken, I mean, I write about it in the context of the certainty trap, which is that they've treated a number of statements and claims as given. So claims about, that any form of inequality, so one of the main structural causes that sociology looks at is discrimination, right? And so the idea, which again, that in itself is not the problem, but the problem is this idea that the mention of anything else is racist, is transphobic, is whatever, right? Like, so that the very act of sort of challenging those claims is itself an act of transgression. In the same, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with, if you're familiar enough to know that sociology has a bad reputation, you probably also know that the focus on kind of ever narrower aspects of identity, right? Sort of like this tiny little group over here, or this identity, and by identity I mean race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, all that stuff that we tend to think of as identity, and looking for ways in which groups are marginalized and sort of hyper focusing on that. Again, not in my view, I don't know that that's necessarily inherently a problem, but it's the assumption that people's intent doesn't matter, that if somebody says, trans women are not women, that then becomes evidence of transphobia. If it's the assumption that if somebody is opposed to affirmative action or using race or other identity characteristics to in hiring decisions, or whatever, or admissions decisions, that is therefore evidence of, in that case, racism. That's the problem. That's where you end up with this sort of closed system of thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. With that, I'm thinking back. I just saw something published about, I don't know if it's a University of Illinois, where they're no longer going to be teaching gender studies, something like that. There's like a particular university. Yeah, I don't know if it was Illinois or something else. And I went to NYU, and now I graduated 20 years ago from NYU.
Yeah.
So 20 plus years ago, I was in a sex and gender studies class.
Yeah.
With Professor, was it Abdul Hadi? I think her name was.
Wow, you have a good memory.
Yeah, and I have a good memory for very particular things.
Okay.
Important stuff, it's gone, bye. But certain stuff like this, sticks around. And I obviously, I forget what year I was in college. I think it was post 9/11. That's when I took the class.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being in the class, and at some point we kind of all figured out everybody's at least sexual orientation, because it came up at some point, and I was like, and I only figured out like, oh, I guess I was the only straight guy in that course. And I was thinking like, oh man, I'm remembering all the times I had my hand raised and I wouldn't get called on. And this is a small course. It wasn't like a big lecture.
Yeah.
It was a course where students were raising their hands and being called on and being able to, to take part. And I wasn't being called on for some reason.
Interesting. Yeah.
And the TA I had, I remember she was very nice. But some of the conversations that we would have in class, I remember there was one time we were talking about female terrorists in particular, who were part of whatever kind of I think in the Middle East, them fighting against their oppressors in the Middle East. And I remember just pointing out how it was almost as if they were treated as if they had no agency whatsoever. That it was just the only reason why they were taking up arms or blowing themselves up or doing anything like that, it was just all because of men. They had no say in this whatsoever.
You said this, or you thought this?
I think I said it at.
Okay.
I wish maybe I had it in a paper.
Okay.
Like that. But it was just sort of like at that time, just realizing like, oh, there's a sort of kind of a reverse discrimination. Don't call on the, I guess, straight white kid, even though I went by Luis Perez at the time, my full name. Don't call on that guy. And there were like other. I remember this one conversation we were having. We watched a documentary about, kind of like about this group, these women who were trying to unionize strippers, and I think it was like strippers in Portland, and and everybody seemed to be so into that. Um, and and I don't know if I had pointed it out at the time, but it's like, yeah, but if they unionize, then and they get like their health benefits and all that, like they're gonna have to be paying a lot of taxes, like all that cash now. They're going to have to start, declaring in one way or another. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. And also I had the temerity to say that like they were treating it like just anybody can go and become a stripper and make money. And I was like, well, there's certain like body types and stuff that, people want to be a stripper. I'm sorry, I'm going into like all this, this trip down memory lane, but it was just like, it was definitely the most hostile, I think, academic experience that I had at the time. And probably, maybe I'm better off for having gone through with it. But in the end, it was sort of like, it's not like I felt like I was getting any strong responses back, based in anything other than, some tacit, shut the fuck up. You're a straight white guy.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think none of that is super surprising to me. I mean, sounds frustrating. I mean, so first of all, like, I don't know. I don't think the U of I has gotten rid of gender study. That would shock me.
Let me look up what that was.
I'm not super tapped into news, but like, that would shock me. Yeah. Just knowing what I know about this campus. So I teach a course. So I'll teach it for the 6th time this spring. I teach a course called Bigots and Snowflakes
cool.
at the awesome. At the U of I, and one of the things that we talk about is one of the things. So, and this is a sociology course. So it is an elective. It's not a required course. So people who are signing up for the course obviously are interested in kind of political polarization or whatever, like talking about contentious topics. And one of the things we talk about is how all of this relates to, how all of this sort of how we talk with other people, how we think about disagreement on issues around race, gender, et cetera, how that relates to democracy, social trust in institutions, all this other stuff. And one of the things that often comes up, I'm circling back to your experience in your NYU class. One of the things that often comes up is this idea of kind of privileging different voices. Like you get to, right. So like you, as the straight white guy, like you don't get to, your opinion doesn't count on whatever topic they were talking about in class, strippers unionizing or whatever. And so one of the things that I'll tell students is, you don't have to, you can, and this comes up actually in multiple areas, but you don't have to listen to anything that I say, like, in terms of all the stuff that I'm talking about, how you have to, like, sort of the importance of clarity and precision in your thinking and of challenging your own thinking, questioning assumptions, et cetera, all that stuff. You can ignore everything that I just said if you don't want to. But what you can't do, really, what doesn't make sense, I mean, can't may be the wrong word, but doesn't make sense to do, is to then say that the thing that you're concerned about is political polarization or institutional trust or democracy or whatever. So in other words, in the response to you, like, if you want to tell, just to put a kind of a finer point on it, if you want to tell all the white men to sit down and shut up, the straight white men, whatever, like, then you can do that, but understand that there's a price for that. Like, there is a social cost to that. And it's going to lead up to all of these other things that you probably don't want. And so part of what I spend a lot of time doing in my own work is kind of getting people to understand, like, actually, no, like, this, you make this decision here and this leads to that. Like, it just does. And so if you don't like this thing over here, this outcome of, all the stuff we just talked about, social trust in institutions, et cetera, then look, trace it back a couple of steps.
Yeah. Right on. And it looks like it was the University of Iowa.
Interesting.
Closing Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies Department. So
it's interesting. Like, a couple of years ago, I used to lead a writers group for Heterodox Academy. This is going back a couple of years. And I remember it was a great group, and, people we'd meet once every 2 weeks or something, and people would talk about kind of what they're working on. And I remember at one point there was a professor, I think he was a professor in that group, and he said, we were talking about gender and women's studies. I can't remember the exact context of the conversation, but somehow it ended up where he made the comment of saying, this was probably when I say years ago, I mean probably 2 to 3 years ago, not 20. He made the comment saying something like, okay, but I would have thought that gender and women's studies and all of the sort of racial and ethnic studies, but I think he specifically was talking about gender and women's studies in this case. He said, I would think that we're at the point where gender and women's studies no longer needs to justify its existence. And I was like, why? I was like, why would they not need to justify it anymore? I was like, why, where does that come from? And I was like, why would any department not need to justify their existence anymore? Like sociology, political science, anything. Like, why would you think that there's a point where any discipline or any set of anything ideas is just, okay, that's it, we're done. Like the whistle blew, we're going off the field, game over, we're done. Like it just made no sense to me. And he did not agree or particularly like what I had to say.
Like I know a bunch of people who, when they went to film school where they learned to cut or edit on film.
Okay.
And there are fewer and fewer programs that do that because just the way the technology's changed. I mean, one, film is expensive. Everything's digital now. So finding one of those, you would definitely have to justify your existence. We need to be, cutting film if we're doing it.
I mean, and you kind of should have to, and the justification could take lots of different forms as far as I'm concerned. But the idea that they shouldn't have to justify it at all, like, I mean, the same with sociology. I mean, I would hold anything to the same standard. Like, and again, that justification, I do think that there's room for lots of different ways to think about justification. So in other words, it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, only the departments that are bringing in millions and millions of dollars in grant money are the ones that are. That's not what I'm saying. I'm like, it could take lots of different forms, but the idea that doesn't even need to be a conversation was pretty foreign to me.
Yeah. Well, what I'm getting from you and, your description of your course and, our conversation, so far, it seems very much in line with the idea of, college isn't supposed to teach you what to think. It's supposed to teach you how to think. And some of my favorite courses, that gender and sexuality course, maybe looking back, like I said, I'm happy that I took it. But sure. Some of my favorite courses were belief and skepticism, which was probably one of the best ones that I had. Like I think it was the first day of the course, and our Professor Mark Cohen, had us split up into two groups: the believers and the skeptics. And
sorry, you self-sorted or you?
Yeah.
Okay.
We self-sorted.
Okay.
And I went over into the believer side. I'm not necessarily sure why, but because I was sort of an young avowed atheist and all that. But maybe he couched it or described it as like, do people believe in absolute, objective morality? I forget, but we were split up, believers and skeptics, and we had to pose pose something to debate about. And I said, rape, RAPE, is wrong. Rape is wrong. So now you had to have the skeptics try to, counter that and say, no, rape isn't wrong, or rape might be wrong, but only in certain circumstances. And the believers were like, no, rape is wrong. And, I think it was a fun, interesting, lively discussion on a very controversial, topic. But yet we were able to have it, and we had to, respond to each other's, arguments. And I would often, I would think the possibility of having that just be kind of like a normal day in class might get, a lot of people in trouble nowadays.
That's interesting. I mean, I would. So, lots of thoughts. So with respect to I'll come back to the rape is wrong thing, because I think it's an interesting example. With respect to the how to think and what to think. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I think the problem with that framing is that it's sort of like, it's a little bit like talking about critical thinking in the sense that no one thinks that so let me back up.
Yep.
If you ask teachers, is critical thinking important? They will all say, and teachers, instructors, no one is going to say, no, I don't think it's important, right? So if you ask college level, higher education, instructors in higher education, should we be teaching students how to think or what to think? They will say, we should be teaching them how to think. Right? Like they would say, it's like, and yet we are in a place where that's not really what we've been doing on college campuses for a long time. And again, keep in mind that my focus is on what I spend my time on is the most controversial, contentious, taboo topics that there are. That's what I do all day long. And so there's something in there, there's something buggy that we don't realize, and that's what the certainty trap sort of tries to get at, that we don't really realize when we're teaching students the what to think part. So certainty keeps us from, so like one of the questions one of the comments that I'll get sometimes in this work is, okay, well, if you're talking about the certainty trap, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of overlap between what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, and ideas like intellectual humility, curiosity, etc. And to which I say, my response is usually, yeah, absolutely. That is 100% right. There's a lot of overlap. Those are incredibly valuable ideas. And the problem is that most of us, if we rely on our own ability to kind of identify when, oh shit, I should be a little bit more intellectually humble here, I should be a little bit more curious, etc. Most of us kind of suck at it. We're just not good at it. And so what I'm saying is actually the way certainty paves the way for us because certainty is the thing that paves the way for us to make judgments. That's just an observation. Your sense that the other person is an idiot or hateful, or that the answers are simple and obvious, that's actually your cue to question, clarify, not change your mind necessarily, but just be clearer about your thinking, which goes back to the rape is wrong example. One of the things that I try to emphasize in my work is that that you have to be able to, there's value in being clear about your moral reasoning. So one version of that would be, or one way to think about that would be kind of what your experience was, the skeptics and the believers. And then you put people in this position where like, okay, do I have to argue that rape is okay? Some really awkward and uncomfortable moral positions. I would say, okay, if you think that there's, which I haven't really given it a lot of thought, I imagine I would fall on the side of, no, it's always wrong. Right. But if that's the case, there's a reason for it. And there's value in being clear. So what is that reason? I mean, I don't know. Because I have a belief in, sexual autonomy, in bodily autonomy, in, I don't know exactly how I would word it, but there's some sort of core principle that we're bumping up against and it may, right. And so and there's still value in articulating that. It's like when I ask students, if I say, tell me why slavery is wrong. Like that's not a claim that it's not wrong. I'm just asking them to be clear about why it's wrong. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, totally. I just going about my day, I'm how many strongly held beliefs do I have that I've never had to defend, that I've never had to, be put on the spot and say, okay, I'm going to, prove to you that I hold the right position, and quite a few of them I'm thinking like, geez, man, do I even know why I believe this or believe something so strongly? Do you know Peter Boghossian by any chance?
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times. I know his work a little bit, and I've met him a couple of times.
Yeah, he's been doing this thing, street epistemology.
Yeah,
and Peter's a buddy of mine, and he can be so annoying with because it's always asked like why, why, and some stuff like I've just kind of come around just to admit it, like man, I don't have a good reason for this. It just makes me feel gross, I guess, and some stuff is just like I don't know, it makes me feel
yeah. I mean, which I don't necessarily think is not a valid reason. I think it's just I think it's just worth thinking about, okay, what are our limits? Like, where's the sort of tipping point that something feels gross versus or gross or unacceptable? Like, I had a student once who, I wrote about this in the book. She was talking about, I think it's in the book or it's in a video that I did. She was talking about, so in the beginning of class, I'll always ask students, I'll just say, is there anything, you've been thinking about that's been going on, like that people want to share, like, usually about something contentious, cancel culture or something. She was talking about how she had gone to, this was a student of Mexican descent. She had described herself earlier in the semester. And she was saying how she had gone into, this was in the fall, it was right after Halloween, which was relevant in a second. And she had said how she had gone into a store, into Target. That's what it was, into Target over the weekend. And there was the display, like an aisle end cap display of sort of tchotchke stuff from El Dia de los Muertos, which is right. Is it on Halloween? I can't remember. On or right after Halloween. And I'm sorry, I should know that. I apologize. But
how dare you?
We're gonna I know, but I was in Mexico during El Dia de los Muertos, but it was like 25 years ago, and I can't remember. Anyway, it's either on or right after Halloween. And someone's gonna get mad about that. But anyway, she saw this end cap, and she was kind of, I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but it bothered her enough that she brought it up in class. And so she was saying like how it was like this plastic crap, like the calaveras, the skulls and whatever, like all the different stuff that was associated with the holiday. And she felt like it was kind of, diminishing the holiday or something, like in a way. And so I was asking her, so she brought this up in class. And so I said, this is going back to sort of limits. And I said, okay, well, okay, so this kind of bothered you, the plastic crap, whatever. I said, imagine that someone had come into the Target who had no idea what this holiday was. I said, just run the thought experiment. I said, someone comes into the Target and they don't know what this holiday is. They've never heard of it before. And they see this end cap and they ask a Target employee, just like in passing, and they say, hey, what's that? Like, what's that stuff for? And the Target employee says, oh, that's for the Day of the Dead. It's a Mexican holiday. And that's it, whatever. It ends there. Let's say it ends there. And that's all they know. I said, and now this person knows that this thing exists, this holiday exists, that they didn't know before. They didn't know when they walked in. I said, does that change anything? I said, and now you could take it to another step. Like now, say it's not one person, say it's 50 people. Say it's 100 people, 150 people, whatever your number is. Like at what point, is there a point where the plastic kind of crapness of the display that bothered you is then offset by, or more than offset by, how many people now know about this holiday that has meaning to you that like didn't know before? Anyway, so the point wasn't to kind of, it wasn't about having an answer. It was kind of like what you're saying about the opinions you don't know why you hold. It was just, it just makes you feel yucky. It's to recognize that there's thinking behind that we don't spend a lot of time paying attention to.
Yeah, my friend Boris Heiken, he's a comedian as well, and he had a great stand-up bit about. It was at the time where we heard a lot more about cultural appropriation, and oh man, all these white people, wearing sombreros and ponchos and dressing up as stereotypical Mexicans for Halloween. And he said, well, I went to Mexico, and on the way back in the airport, there's a store that sells sombreros. And they were really trying hard to sell me these sombreros, even though I was going back to the United States. So he was put in this terrible situation of, do I commit cultural appropriation, or do I tell this developing country, go fuck yourself? You're not getting any more of my money. Yeah. And I'm not bringing your culture back,
Right. I mean, yeah. Right. Like, actually, I find the whole cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation thing, I think I go into some detail about that in the book as well. Like, it's just, because it all seems to hinge on what the person's intent is. I'm like, well, how do you know what their intent is? Like, and why, and they plus all the sort of questions about like, well, who owns culture anyway? And like, what, I just find all that stuff interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that 100%. What I also find funny is like a lot of times the loudest people who complain about cultural appropriation, they don't actually have anything that anyone's appropriating. So I'll hear about, people talking about, like, say, the cultural appropriation of hip hop from people who don't even who aren't even hip hop musicians, who
Yeah,
aren't even singers and all that. It's like, there's, they are taking our culture, and it's like, but you don't have an album. Like, you haven't even dropped an album.
interesting.
And I think, and with the cultural appropriation stuff too, it becomes so funny, like say with music, where
Mhm.
when you turn an album over and you start looking at all the people who were involved in that production, how it runs it just, there's so many different types of people who are involved.
Yeah,
Like my kids, again, being young, 4 and 3, I've been introducing them to music that I listen to, and or stuff that I used to listen to a lot, and they've gotten really into like rock music from like the late 80s, early 90s. So
awesome.
Faith No More has been a big one, Red
That's
Hot Chili Peppers. And we also started listening. It was around Halloween. We started watching the video for Thriller, Michael
sure.
Jackson's Thriller, and I hadn't seen it in decades. And
Yeah,
I'm watching it, almost viewing it for the first time because my kids are, and just seeing how brilliant it is. Like the song itself is brilliant. The mini movie, the 13-minute movie I think made, is brilliant. I love the choreography and seeing things that I'm enjoying it so much. And it turns out the guy who wrote it is this white British guy.
interesting.
And the band that wrote and recorded most of the album, I think perhaps all the album, is the band Toto. The members of Toto are the band that were working with Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson to make this thing. So the idea that, Thriller, one of the most iconic albums of all time, is a strictly, African American creation, is just silly, because you have
Mhm.
all these people, who knows who the engineers were and all that. So I find time is well spent enjoying the art than
Mm.
trying to, close the door on who can enjoy the art, or try it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, so I agree. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not where I thought you were going with the Michael Jackson example.
Oh,
I thought you were going to go I thought you were going down the road of, can you separate the artist from the
oh,
art?
oh, oh,
But
yeah,
right,
no, it's funny
which
you
is
say
also
that.
interesting.
It's funny you say that, because as far as I'm concerned, my kids will never learn anything else about Michael Jackson other than these great songs. That's all I want them to do.
I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. So I'm 51, and
Mhm.
oh my God, I had a 6 foot tall poster
Oh,
of Michael
wow.
Jackson in my room. Yeah.
Which
Well,
which album was it?
I think it was Thriller.
Oh, wow.
It was, he was like wearing yellow and white, or I can't remember. That and Duran, where that was like,
Duran
yeah.
Duran's fantastic. Yeah.
Oh God, I was totally fangirled over Duran. I think there are cases where there's sort of questionable, like, I don't want to kind of poo-poo all of it. Well, at the same
Right.
time, like, there are cases, like, so I remember a student telling me, or someone in a class telling me, that there was some influence or something who had, I'm going to totally mess up this example, but like, the basic idea was that there was this kind of water, or some kind of product, like flavored water or something, that was traditional in some particular culture, and they had this, I think it was some influencer had like repurposed it, and basically taken the same idea that had existed in this culture for a while, and sold it under, and said like, oh, this new thing that I've like. And I get how someone could be like, well,
Right.
what the fuck? Like, that's not. And at the same time, like, I sort of feel like it's a no. I can see how that would be annoying. I don't. It sort of seems like the price of cultures intermingling.
Mhm.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't. I don't know. Okay, so it's sort of like, okay, well, yeah, that is a thing, and that happened, and that's frustrating, and I don't know I'm not sure that then therefore means that every instance of cultural blending is especially where you're talking about, a white culture and a non-white culture, is therefore a problem.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. I don't see how you get there from there.
Yeah. On the cultural side of things, or that debate, I feel like it's been a little while since I've seen like a real strong push against cultural appropriation on like a
Yeah.
specific product. It seems like that's kind of gone away a little bit. The one thing that I keep seeing, though, is something along the lines of like, there is no white culture. And to an extent, it's like, well, yeah, sure, in that, like, there are Greeks, there are Spaniards, there are French, there are English, there
Sure.
are Nordic countries. But the idea that white people, or at least white Americans, have no culture, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, because I live here, and I look around and I'm like, there's a lot going on. I don't know, maybe it's just like geographical as far as.
It's so interesting. So like as I'm hearing you say that, I have two reactions. I'm just telling you internally. Like on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, I get that. That makes, like, why wouldn't there be? That doesn't make any sense. And I also have this totally, I'm like, ugh, like
Yeah,
white, like it's the
yeah, what
whole,
does that
like,
mean?
I'm like, oh, like it's cringy. And so like but definitely feel both things going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Something I want to ask you too. We're, with the certainty trap. Um, is there another side to that? What I would call the uncertainty trap, where, and this is something in my book, I have a chapter called "Stupid Representation."
Okay.
It's basically pointing out how, people will often lead and say, as a woman, as a man, as a person
I
of
did
color,
that
blah
when
blah,
I said as a divorced person. Yeah.
as a divorced person. But no one ever says, like, as a stupid person, I'm about to say something, because that would, knock you down, so many pegs. And so it's something that I found is, like,
As
as
a
I've got,
total moron. Right.
yeah, as a total moron. Um, there are sometimes where I guess I long for the days when I was younger and a lot more certain,
Mm.
in where I stood. Whereas now I find myself a lot of like, man, I don't know, and I'm is it a trap? My uncertainty. I don't know if I'm able to, to climb out of that. Like, I often find myself just like, man, maybe there's like too much on the line. Like, if I, say something
Yeah.
with such a, certainty.
I mean, so is there an uncertainty trap? So the way I would answer that is I would say,
Next book. That's your next book.
yeah, no, the next book is something else.
Okay.
I would say two things. One is there's nothing, and so there's two kind of concerns that I get often about this work. That I would say there are lots, but there are two that kind of rise to the top in terms of the frequency with which I hear them. One of them is like, okay, well, if you're saying certainty is a trap, does that mean that we can't say, this is good and this is bad and this is right and this is wrong? Is it just a total lapse into moral relativism, et cetera? And the answer to that is no, because there's nothing about, it's sort of like going back to the kind of the rape and the slavery examples that we were giving earlier. There's nothing about avoiding the certainty trap, what I call, that says you can't declare this to be wrong. What I'm saying is, be clear about the principle that you're like, what is the thing that you're bumping up against? Why is it wrong? That's all. That is the sort of criterion in that respect that applies to the certainty trap. So like it in no way implies that you can't say this is right and this is wrong. It means being clear about why something is right or wrong, and applying that principle consistently. That's one thing. The other thing that I would say in terms of like, does it mean the uncertainty trap, does it mean kind of walking around in a philosophical stupor, like navel gazing all through your life? It doesn't have to. Like, there's no. So first of all, there are lots of things that we treat as certain, and there's no consequence. Like, and it doesn't matter. Like, we treat them as certain. And if you want to sort of dive into philosophical questions about certainty, and that's one thing that you could do. I find that interesting, but like, there's no reason that you have to start questioning everything all the time. The point is to recognize how it affects our broader political conversation, right? And so like there's lots of things that are, for all intents and purposes, we treat as certain, and there's really no consequence. This is a pen and this is a phone and whatever. And so like there's no reason that you have to be questioning everything all the time. The other thing that I would say is and I talk about this a lot in the book, like there's nothing about avoiding the certainty trap that means suddenly any explanation has an equal probability of being true. So like it doesn't mean that suddenly the question of whether the earth is flat or spheroid is now a coin flip, because everything is just a free for all, and it's just a coin toss. Because if you think of a number line, between 0 and 1. It's bound between 0 and 1, where 0 and 1 occupy positions of certainty. In my work, the way I use certainty is as a binary. So you're either certain about something and there's no doubt, or you're not certain. So in other words, to say that there's, in the way I use this term, to say that there's degrees of certainty, I'm more certain, less certain, doesn't make any sense. That's actually in their space of confidence. And so this number line 0 to 1, if you essentially cut off the 0 and the 1, ignoring that creates new endpoints, everything in between is confidence, right? How confident are you about a particular thing? And so it goes back to the question of, is the earth flat or spheroid? No, you're not. It's not a coin toss, because everything, our knowledge is probabilistic. It's about sort of what we understand the world is about, is probabilistic in nature. And so in practical terms, if I'm teaching a geography class, do I need it to be taught by a flat earther in the interests of like not falling into the certainty trap? No. Would I be interested in hearing, in a 15-week semester, would I want to have one class, 10 minutes of one class, talking about why flat earthers believe what they believe? I would. Totally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And there's a really great video on YouTube where you will find a lot of flat Earth stuff of a flat earther who ends up disproving the flat Earth himself. He does.
Really?
Yeah, he does an experiment that I guess has been around for thousands of years that the ancient Greeks did when it comes to measuring, I guess, like the curvature of the Earth with a boat in the horizon and all that. So it's a nice thing to behold. Ilana, before I let you go, since this is the first episode of 2025, I'm going to throw two things at you. If you need time, I understand. Well, I'd love to know what was your best moment of 2024, or something that you really enjoyed or you're proud of, and something you're looking forward to in this new year. And I could get started while you think it. So my best moment for me in 2024, at least career-wise, is I got to open for Rob Schneider on the road, 3 shows.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was a big moment for me. I grew up watching Rob Schneider and a fan of his, been a fan of his for so long, and then getting to work with him. And one show in particular. It was in Atlantic City. I think it was for about 1,200 people, 1,200 people. And the previous show that I had done on my lonesome, I performed for 6 people. 6. So I went from 6 people to 1,200.
That's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. So for 2025, I'm hoping more 1,200 person shows.
Oh, that's great. Good for you.
Thank you.
Best moment of 2024. I guess I'm trying to keep it in the professional
sphere
and not in the family space.
Sure.
I would say getting the book out. Like it
Hell
has to be like you're just getting it. Like it feels like, like just finally getting it out. And then what I'm looking forward to, just what I say, I feel very lucky that I can do the work that I wanted, that I get to spend most of my time just kind of thinking and writing, and I don't have to be super invested in. I mean, obviously, I want people to read it, but like because I have a tenured position, like I don't have to. If my book doesn't sell, like life will go on. Like I can still. I don't have a particularly high salary, but nor do I have a particularly expensive lifestyle. So it's afforded me I have a great amount of flexibility in terms of what I can do. And so just having more opportunities to continue to do the work that I'm doing. I don't know how satisfying that is as an answer, but that's probably what I'm looking forward to.
No, I think that's great. And I'm very happy that you're able to do that. And I hope everyone, if you're watching this, please check out The Certainty Trap. And I hope we'll be hearing more from Ilana in 2025. So Ilana, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.